Romanticism in culture can be recognized by certain features that are almost intangible or even ethereal. Naturally, it can also be recognized by the characteristics of the artist, personal feelings, especially love and hatred, and the expression of his romantic behavior and hobbies, which, in pieces of art, are expressed as the admiration of strange and mysterious things. This is reflected by interest in things that are partially understood or completely unknown. Romanticism is a cultural phenomenon that can be historically defined or may have no historical boundaries. Most often it is related to the idealization of the past, nostalgia, patriotism, the artist's occasionally naive portrayal of himself as especially important, and exceptional attention to a person's inner world. In Lithuanian culture, historically defined Romanticism was expressed in different forms as early as during the first decades of the 19th century, but it particularly prospered between the uprising of 1831 and 1863. This was the time when the culture of the Lithuanian lands could not expect support from the Tsarist Russia, which had occupied the country. Lecturers and graduates of Vilnius University, which had been closed down, keenly cherished the hope for support. Contrary to those countries in which the worldview of Romanticism was first of all related with the artist's withdrawal and retreat to his own world of dreams and experiences, Lithuanian artists remained social. In this respect, Romanticism in a way built upon most of the ideas of the Enlightenment, which are closely associated with the works of Jonas Rustemas. Jonas Rustemas enriched Lithuanian art with appreciation of everyday life and interest in the lives of ordinary people and social outcasts of that time. He unveiled the multifaceted nature of everyday life, the traditions of people from exotic countries, and local Jewish people. His masterful sketch-like drawings contain elements of irony, self-parody, and satire characteristic of Romanticism. The young generation of Romantics absorbed his special attention to self-portraiture, a means of self-understanding and revelation. However, the teacher's irony and playfulness was often replaced by the tone of idealization. After the uprising of 1831, it was not so much the image of reality as it was fiction and historical works that became a source of inspiration for artists. This was when the first Lithuanian and Vilnius histories, albeit mythologized and romanticized by Mykolas Balinskis, Juozapas Ignotas Kraševskis, Simonas Daukantas, and other authors, were written and published. A rhymed saga called Konradas Valenrodas and the rhymed mystic drama Vėlinės were probably the most famous works. The latter, called the All Souls' Day, was written based on folk rituals that survived in folklore, and it was filled with horror, the mood of a macabre dance, and full of dream images. Strengthening historicism and the political mystical current of literary Romanticism influenced the content and topics of artistic works. A lot of artists tried to illustrate the most famous literary and historical works of that time. Works by Adomas Mickevičius and later works by Vladislavas Sirokomlė and Juozapas Ignotas Kraševskis fed the imagination of painters and graphic artists throughout the entire 19th century. Illustrations created by Vincentas Makauskas for the epic poem Vitolio Rauda, Vitaly's Lament, which immortalized a legendary vision of Lithuania's mythological past and which was written by Juozapas Ignotas Kraševskis, were probably the most artistically interesting among a great number of book illustrations. Valentinas Vankavičius, one of the most well-known and talented painters of that time, became famous as a portraitist. In the images of the political and cultural figures he created, the echoes of messianic ideas popular at that time were easily recognizable. Quite a few artists were poets, historians, or amateur musicians at the same time. This is a very unique cultural phenomenon of historical Romanticism, and later of history in general. On the other hand, because of the general cultural situation, the weakness of the market for art, and the shortage of patrons, artists had to combine artistic activity with other professions or some other profitable activity. In the state and palace environment, art became a fashionable form of spending leisure time. Most amateur creative artists in one way or another had studied at the art department of Vilnius University at some point, or they were tutored by house artists and governesses. Landscapes, paintings depicting everyday life, and more rarely, historical paintings became popular artistic genres. However, in portraits and self-portraits, which were even more popular, and in more objective genres of art, features of patriotic idealism can also be found. Vincentas Dmachauskas' paintings stand out from the works of other landscape painters. This painter created quite an unusual version of one of the most popular genres of Romanticism. Even though concrete objects, the Lithuanian countryside, historical monuments, estates and panoramas of Vilnius, are painted in his landscapes, some kind of mystery and uneasiness are always present in them as well. Often the painter chose natural phenomena in the process of change, such as landscapes lit by the sunset or moonlight that reflected the nostalgic mood of Lithuanian landscapes. Besides the painters that have been mentioned, Kanutas Rusiackas, Polikarpas Joteika, Mykolas Kulieša, Adomas Šemešys, Karolis Ripinskis, Konstantinas Kukevičius and other artists engraved and lithographed works of the same genre or similar content. Their works spread out into the sitting rooms of little provincial estates and into the offices of the urban intellectuals, everywhere forming the same cultural spirit of self, which they did not view as ethereal. The arrival of lithography, which satisfied the public's desire to have paintings created by famous artists, portraits reminding them of the ancestors and their past, as well as images of castles and estates, was very important to the spread of the works of local artists and artistic heritage. Lithographs, which were painting-like and close to drawings, but were inexpensively and quite easily copied, suited this purpose especially well. Eventually, the fashion of collecting and capturing antiquities and artistic monuments provided the beginning of a new phenomenon, thematic lithographic albums. Vilnius Albumas, the Album of Vilnius, by Jonas Kazimieras Vilčinskis, published as a series in Paris, was the most impressive and popular of such albums. Professors of Vilnius University and other famous people were depicted there. Additionally, the palaces and estates of famous families and their surroundings and historic works held in these places, armors, swords and coats of arms, were immortalized in this album. Sacramental buildings, valuable in an artistic or historic sense, their interiors and pictures of saints and portraits of historic characters, as well as Lithuanian dukes and noblemen, were captured. Love for nature and local or supposedly local surroundings, which was reflected in pieces of art, was also expressed in park architecture. Regular classical French-type parks, distinguished by regular plans, geometrically formed lawns and pruned plants, started being combined with the surroundings distinguished by features of landscaped parks representative of English parks. In this environment, a naturally formed landscape, hills, valleys, rivers, lakes, and flora, was emphasized. This could not be done without human hands. New water features with small islands and bays and waterfalls were set up, and small hills were made. Painterly decorative sculptures were installed in places devoted to a certain theme, often patriotic, and small architecture, gazebos, small bridges, lattices, artificial ruins and fountains of the most elaborate forms, imitating different styles, was created. The first part of this type of park was designed for show, and the romantic part was intended for walking, dating, resting and reflecting. Interest in the natural surroundings and faraway countries led to greenhouses, in which exotic plants were grown and which were called gardens of paradise, becoming one of the most important elements of estates and residences. Classical estate palaces with a few column porticos in the facades were still appreciated during the Romantic period. However, buildings with more complicated plans and sometimes asymmetrical buildings, for the decoration of which neo-Romanesque, neo-Gothic and neo-Renaissance elements were used, also began to be built. Love for the past and the social topics of that time were also reflected in this field of art. Boulders, the local construction material, grew especially popular. However, they were not very suitable for construction of houses, and for this reason they were most often used in the architecture of barns and quite often of churches and chapels. Most houses were built from non-plastered bricks. To achieve comfort and a nice look, premises were set up in different directions and spaces of different height were combined. Interiors were furnished with comfortable furniture, which was most often of the Biedermeier style, cupboards, chairs and settees, bookstands and small tables, on which albums of lithography, drawings and small sculptures were often displayed. Furniture was made from locally growing trees and was upholstered with quite simple upholstery. The floor was most often covered with estate carpets made in local workshops. Rooms and stairwells were decorated with paintings or galleries of family portraits and weapon or armor collections. Luxurious fireplaces, stoves, candle holders and chandeliers were an inseparable part of the interiors. Quite a private life was led in such an environment. It is not hard to imagine how the community who gathered in such parlors enjoyed watching plays, reading poetry, listening to music, drawing, embroidering, and inevitably discussing politics. The concepts of the art schools of the country were also formed here through discussions on images, themes, and plots. The main motif of such activity was the need to have everything one's own way. Self-portraits, portraits of friends or acquaintances, national heroes and poets, landscapes of the country, historical monuments, and religion.